Most brutal killers in history. Although the term serial killer is highly contested in academia in general, it refers to a person who has killed 3 or more people over some time with cooling-off periods in between each crime. They typically get a kick out of hurting other people and have an obsessive drive to do so. The most heinous serial killers in history will be covered in this video. Number 7. The Murderer Jack. Probably the most notorious serial killer in history is Jack the Ripper. Although there are several serial killers with a larger number of victims, what sets him apart is how little is known about him. Even the renowned Scotland Yard Police Department was unable to identify the skilled and cunning serial killer known as Jack the Ripper. Because he spent much of his time in London's Whitechapel neighborhood in 1888, he is also occasionally referred to as the Whitechapel Murderer. Because they resided close to the slums, where there was less of a police presence, Jack the Ripper thought that female sex workers were easy pickings. He hideously disfigured the victims, which is what made the killing so horrific. Of all his deeds, the murder of Mary Jane Kelly was the most heinous. Her face was severed and her body was beyond recognition deformed. They removed her intestines and positioned them beneath her head. Her heart was missing from the crime scene, along with her severed breasts. Number 6. Ramirez Richard. Born in Texas in 1960, Richard Ramirez was an American serial killer, rapist, and burglar. He started using drugs heavily and became interested in Satanism. Ramirez, sometimes referred to as the Night Stalker, operated from 1984 till 1985. Ramirez looked up to his Vietnam-era cousin Mike as a child, but Mike was obsessed with abusing women and he used to show little Richard photos of the ladies he had killed in Vietnam. In the end, he shot his wife in front of Ramirez, who was just 13 years old at the time. This affected Ramirez, who developed a violent obsession despite several other reasons that contributed to his descent into darkness. Before being apprehended in 1985, Ramirez murdered and tortured 14 individuals in all. For a total of 14 months, he committed rapes, robberies, and horrific murders. Ramirez killed Vincent Zara and his wife Maxine by shooting the husband and then viciously attacking the wife with a knife. Then he gouged out the eyeballs of Maxine Zara. He never felt regret and said, "Hey, big deal," in response to being given a death by gas chamber sentence. There is always a risk of death. I'll run into you at Disneyland. Number 5. The Ahmad Suradji. A serial killer from Indonesia named Ahmad Suradji went by the nickname The Sorcerer. According to reports, he killed 42 individuals between 1986 and 1997. What was most unsettling was his intent and the way he killed his victims. He said that his late father had told him in a dream that he would become a mystic healer if he drank the saliva of 70 young women who had died. He began killing young girls since it would take too long to find 70 ladies who had died young. Numerous women sought beauty and wealth from him since he presented himself as a shaman. Claiming it was part of the rite, he would take them to a sugarcane field and bury them waist-deep after receiving payment. He then choked them till he was drinking their spit. Then, he said, he would bury the decaying body so that its head faced his house, giving him more power. On July 10, 2008, he was given a death sentence and killed by firing squad. Number 4. Mitsutomu Tsutomu. Tsutomu Miyazaki had malformed hands as a result of his early birth. His grades started to suffer as a result, and he was harassed at school. He struggled to socialize and acquired an inferiority mentality. Between 1988 and 1989, he started kidnapping and killing young girls because his mind had become so deranged. He went by the names Little Girl Murderer and Dracula. He kidnapped Mary Kano, a 4-year-old daughter, on August 22, 1988. He killed her by strangulation, sexually assaulted her corpse, let it decay, and then came back to take out some of her organs. Apart from his vicious acts of aggression, Miyazaki also appeared to take pleasure in causing further distress and fear to the relatives of his victims. He would begin by calling them in silence before going so far as to mail the family pictures, teeth, and ground-up bones of the daughters along the postcard bearing ominous messages like, "Mary burned in a furnace. Bones. Look into it. Show." The ages of his 4 victims ranged from 4 to 7. Following their strangulation, he indulged in necrophilia. In addition, he consumed a portion of one of his victims' hands and drank her blood. Finally, Miyazaki was caught trying to harass a girl in a park. He seemed composed even after being apprehended. The date of Miyazaki's hanging execution was June 17, 2008. Number 3. Gacy John Wayne. Between 1972 and 1978, John Wayne Gacy, an American serial killer and rapist, killed at least 33 teenage boys and young men in Cook County, Illinois. He worked as a clown throughout the day at kids' parties. With the pretense of construction employment, Gacy enticed his victims, who he then sexually raped and killed mostly by strangling or asphyxia. He frequently introduced himself to his victims as Pogo the Clown. Gacy, like a lot of serial killers, was raised by an abusive father and experienced alienation. In the 1960s, he managed a fast food franchise and coordinated clown performances at social events. Gacy was arrested and charged with sexual assault on May 10, 1968. Subsequently, the police discovered that he had interred 27 bodies beneath his residence. On May 10, 1994, he was found guilty, given the death penalty, and put to death by lethal injection. Number 2. Dr. Death Harold Frederick Shipman. Approximately 250 people were killed. The British physician Harold Frederick Shipman was deserving of the moniker Dr. Death. Approximately 218 of his patients were murdered. However, the number may have reached 250. In addition, he is the only physician from Britain to have been convicted guilty of killing his patients. Another name for him was the Angel of Death. He injected fatal amounts of medications into his victims to murder them. Shipman killed his patients by overdosing on morphine after forging their wills to gain their wealth. Although Shipman's patients were dying at a rate that worried the local undertaker, the police were unable to uncover any evidence against Shipman. Following the demise of Kathleen Grundy, an affluent 81-year-old widow, an autopsy determined that her cause of death was an overdose of morphine. He was detained, charged, and found guilty. He committed suicide by hanging himself in his cell on January 13, 2004. Number 1. Zodiac Killer. In the latter half of the 1960s, the Zodiac Killer operated in Northern California. Although the number of deaths he is known to have caused is at least 5, detectives suspect the offender, who is still at large, may have had up to 37 victims. On December 20, 1968, David Faraday and his fiancée Betty Lou Jensen were shot and killed close to their car in what is believed to be the Zodiac Killer's first attack. The killings lacked a reason, and the authorities were unable to identify the suspect. The odd habit of the murderer communicating with the police and media via ciphers and encrypted texts gave rise to the moniker Zodiac. In 2020, a perplexing mystery was ultimately solved after 51 years of evading scientists and cryptographers. It said, "It brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise sooner. After all, I now have enough slaves to work for me where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I am not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one and paradise's death. I hope you are having a lot of fun trying to catch me that wasn't me on the TV show." Witnesses provided the authorities with a sketch of the Zodiac Killer, but he escaped capture. Do you like it? Kindly give your valuable response in our comment section below, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting and informative videos.